All right, I'm Travis Marker. We're here today with Steward Growth and the Manifestation Group. We have America Francis, who's the Director of Programs, and Michelle Williams, who's the Director of our Women in Business program. Um, and today's theme that we've kind of explored that we're gonna play with is seasons, because we're recording this October 19th, so we're definitely in the season as it's starting with fall. But as we talk about strategic manifestation and self-care, or maybe creating the right soil for our foundation, maybe there are seasons where we're not necessarily focused on our vision for a second. Like we just have to kind of like just relax and just kind of regroup. I've explored a little bit of this in some other topics, but we're gonna kind of just see how this goes. Like I know that I've had goals where I have kind of lazy seasons in the goal, just so I don't have to like just the intensity of trying to pursue a goal also obstruct like just distracts from your vision, or starts to impede your focus. So sometimes having an off season or a cozy season where maybe you're just giving yourself a break, I think is super relevant. But maybe America, why don't you play with that a little bit?
So you like to talk sometimes about farming, and I'm not talking about not focusing on the vision, but sometimes you just let the field rest, or you plant a kind of a resting crop, and it's not the same type of active focus, but you would still be focused on it mentally planning, but just kind of a regeneration phase of it where you're maybe in the farming analogy, you would be looking at the seeds you have or ordering seeds, or when you get to winter, um, well, before you get to winter, you have all of the harvesting and the production, right? You're canning or drying things or whatever. And all that preservation takes a lot of extra energy. And then, I mean, if you look at like the Little House on the Prairie type thing, they sit and read by the fire when it's all snowy outside, and they eat the things that they've been canning. And there's just kind of that before the spring, when they have the little sprouts, they just have a time of, I mean, I guess you still have to get up and feed animals or whatever, but
Well, you may
all
have
day it's
you might have
cold and
maintenance,
you're in the house and you're studying. Maybe you're focusing more on school. Maybe um,
but you're just nourishing other resources.
you're connecting with your family and telling stories, and there's just a shift. There's a season that happens with your lives too. Some of the focus we have in this group is transitions. So maybe you have a part of your life where you're going to school, and you have a part of your life where you're really in a career mode. And then you have a part of your life where maybe you have an injury and you have to just slow down and focus on you.
Yeah, well, I like the idea of I'm kind of like getting the idea of nourishing other things. So like you might be nourishing the soil for a while before you plant, which is the maybe this is where you just like let your muscles rest, or you're letting your mind rest. It doesn't mean you've lost ultimate focus on the goal, but
You're
it
not checking out. It's an important part of the cycle.
yeah, the rejuvenation of the process. Even my daughter brought this up because she's in cross country, and she says, the rest days are really important, Dad, because that's when your muscles are healing, but you still have to go out and do something. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like a rest day means you're lazy. A rest day just means that you're refocusing the energy so that you're whatever you worked hard on the day before is rejuvenated.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we neglect the resting part. I think sometimes people give a lot of credit to the busyness and the energy and the work and the very obvious products of your work. And I think sometimes sharpening your saw a little bit can make a huge impact later. But if you're using the saw, you're not sharpening the saw.
Sure. Michelle, this is kind of in your wheelhouse of foundational wellness. Like, what are your thoughts?
It's interesting because I actually, to go along with what you guys have said, there's been times that I have gotten to the point of like almost absolute burnout because it's like, oh, you gotta go, you gotta grind, you gotta do these things. And then it's like, okay, but what about resting? And then there's been times that I've rested and it's like, oh, but then I'm being lazy. And I had somebody point out that when you think about even in winter time, when things seem like they're asleep, they're really not. Things are active, but very much behind the scenes. And there's been times, like lots of things have phases and cycles, right? Like the moon, women, like there's things cycle and the moon is full. And then there's times that it's like the new moon where you don't see it. And so, even just this last week, like coming back from vacation and just feeling like, okay, well, now I got to get at it. And then it was like, but I'm exhausted. I was like, yeah, but I got to get at it. And then so I took like 2 days to do a little bit. And then I would take a half-hour nap and just actually just like mentally tell my brain, okay, we're going to shut off for a minute and just rest. And then like today, I felt like I was on fire and I was able to have that brain production that I needed to actually have ideas come and thoughts come. And maybe your rest period, like it doesn't have to be, with the earth, it's quarterly, right? Like the seasons are like 3 months long. Ours doesn't have to be like that. Um, Maybe it could be a day or even just like a couple of hours or something, so maybe you have your grind period during your day. But even yesterday, I just set a timer for 10 minutes and I just brain dumped and I just wrote whatever it was to give my brain that rest. But then it was still able to be productive, like Travis was saying, in other areas to have insight. And so I feel like you kind of just have to figure out what it is for you, but to know that, it doesn't have to be a really long time, but that rest period is important because, like Travis was saying, it does give you that time to heal.
So it needs to be intentional. We can block out those times. And also another important thing we've talked about is self-talk, because maybe there's no good reason at all why people feel this pressure to be doing something, but whether it's a habit or whether people have been kind of writing you to be active. I know I've had periods in my life where I've just been trying to sit and read or something, and somebody's been like, hey, don't you have something to do? And so maybe outside influences, but also these internal things that we say to ourselves about, you were talking about women stuff. Maybe you're just in pain, physical pain. Maybe you've just done something that was really exhausting, like finals, for example, or a big house project, or maybe you just had a baby, like all of these things. And I know some things are more culturally acceptable than others for resting, like having a baby. People generally expect that you'll need some time to rest. But if you've done some other big project, like a divorce or moving or a new job, some things that are really good news can really be exhausting. Getting married.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I notice that there's times I'm like in a definite flow because like the energy's right and my feelings are right and my energy's right and like I'm rested. And then there's other times where I'm like, wow, I'm super distracted. Like I've let things like totally like just come in because maybe I just haven't been paying attention to my whole system maintenance. And
Mm.
it's like when those definite lemons come in, the life transitioning lemons, like your goal isn't the priority because you have to get through whatever you're going through. I mean, whether it is pain or whether it is whatever, you have to be able to identify through self-awareness. I'm not moving forward until I get through this. As soon as I get through this,
Survival.
that then I can start to kind of play through. Yeah, like this is what's going to happen. As we're talking, I like the Taoist comment that says the essence is nobody hurries and yet it gets done. Like if you look at the earth, I still it was surprising to me, but as we got through COVID and we came through the spring, I remember looking outside and remember thinking, how is spring coming? Like we're in COVID and like everybody's shut down, like, but the earth is still moving, like the earth still gets to do its thing. Like buds were coming up, like And I just remember thinking, like, how is this even happening? Because we have been so shut down. Like the earth didn't get shut down, like the earth didn't get to have a break. But I just remember as those things started coming out of the ground, I'm like, wow, we still have to like time is still moving. Like this is
Did that give you hope?
I don't know. It was actually a little depressing because like I don't feel like I had like because of the things that normally happen during COVID that were not happening. I almost felt a little bit robbed because I didn't get my normal experience during that season, like because
Mhm.
I was engaged in other things during that season. So it's like I felt like I lost a season, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden like the buds are coming up. I did transition to happiness as I'm like, okay, I guess spring's still happening. So that's good news. But it was I still there was a sense of loss because I had
Disorientation
yeah,
too.
disorientation because I had not kind of been in my routine because of the disruption of that mass experience.
Yeah, that's interesting because we do get really out of balance when our systems break down like that, but usually it isn't on such a societal scale where everybody's messed up at the same time.
Yeah. Like, yeah, because if you can't reference off things, for me, that's like super deregulating because I'm like, wow, like I thought things were supposed to be where they're at. Like I don't know which part of my neuroses that represents, but like I do like things in order. Like I know where I'm not generally the person who loses his keys because they go in the exact same spot like every day because I know if I didn't put them there, I would lose them. So
Well, good.
like,
I'm glad you have things that work for you.
yeah, I mean, some people think it's annoying because they're like, they don't like to necessarily live inside that. But I'm like, look, if you want me to function, just please like play like I need my stuff to go by my rules. If you have your stuff, like do your stuff. But like if you want me to play effectively, I kind of have these things that happen for myself.
Mhm.
Another thing that I've come into that I thought has been interesting is hypo and hyper stress responses. Have you either one of you studied much of this, the somatic things that relate to your mind's engagement with your body in relation to stress?
Well, if you catch us up a little bit, I think I have some experience with it.
Yeah. So I just did a neuropsych in connection with some other things related to a car accident, and
Yeah.
I was tremendously deregulated. Like I was because of this, like I did 2 hours of testing one day, and then I did 8 hours of testing the next day, and it was super intense. Like it was very much like wow. Like at one point, I was gonna throw up during one section just because I don't know what was happening, but my brain was like I felt like it was swimming. Like I was really having nausea in connection to the images that they kept showing me and me wanting to identify. and and then later, like it took me a few days to get out of that process. And some of that I understand relates to just a head injury, and some of that relates to the stress about the process. And some of that relates to my own stress about those stresses. And
And I think the stress really affects the test results. Like the therapist was like, you were really getting, anxious or whatever about perfectionistic, doing well on this test. I'm like, yeah, I want to do well on the test. Come on. This is an IQ test. I want to do well.
yeah, so through as kind of a result of that, it was brought up that I should look into somatic processes. And I recognize that I have a tremendously strong aversion to the word hypochondria because I when I hear people say they're hypochondriacs or somebody is a hypochondriac, it means they're faking or they are not having a legitimate experience,
Yeah.
that and I don't know where that is necessarily from, but if somebody says what's just in your head, I'm gonna destroy you right now. Like we're not gonna fight. I'm gonna destroy you because I felt like it's a devaluation of your experience, right? Like I have no idea what I'm experiencing. But,
Yeah.
but for somebody to say it's not real, it's like that's not going to
It's
help,
invalidating.
right? So it's like whatever I'm experiencing, uh, it's my business. You know, like if I'm recognizing, I'm expressing whatever. So even though you might like this other person might feel like it's a minor thing.
Oh, it's a judgy thing too.
Yeah.
You're
I'm
just
like, yeah,
making it up. You can't really tell the difference between your real stuff and made up
yeah,
stuff.
like you're just trying to get out of a meeting or you're just trying to get out of effort or I'm like, I appreciate the
Slacker.
yeah, like you're devaluing my effort. You're like putting upon me that I'm a slacker. I mean, I can't and I cannot necessarily specifically reference where this is all from. I'm sure it's my childhood. Michelle is my sister, so she may have some reference for what this is, but
You
it
are
was
not a slacker. I know that for sure.
well, I know that what was interesting is I got into studying somatic responses. They are your body's engagement with what you're not engaging with. So like if
Is
you're
that the
having
body keeps the score
kind of like
stuff?
it's in that book, but then there's this one I'm reading right now is the body reset. Let's see what's called the body stress reset. And I was amazed at how much sense this book made like almost immediately. Let me call it say what it is. It's The Mind Body Stress Reset by Rebecca Ladine. She's an MSSEP something. But she immediately talks about so the mind body stress reset. She immediately talks about trying to be just aware of what your body's feeling because you could be having two different experiences.
Well, your body could be having experiences all over the place that are different from each other. It could be a really complicated situation.
Yeah. And so like one of the things that my body will experience is hypo, which is your freeze. Like it just starts to kind of like shut down and like I'll get flush, like things start happening where I'm like, I just cannot process this right now. I gotta go like take a nap. But it's different than like I'm tired, right? It's like you recognize I do not care.
Did you get that before your accident ever?
I don't know. Like that's one of the things that's why this is actually really good for me is I know that I had hyper stress responses, which for me it's like adrenaline and very
Oh,
very kind of manic or mania or whatever. But I don't necessarily have that because it's not like I'm saying I'm bipolar. I'm saying I just recognize that when I get very stressed, I start to talk too much. I start to be super like, let's just do this because I'm trying to put out the fire, right? So I'm not quite in fight or flight, but I'm definitely in a quasi fighting creativity.
yeah.
And I'm trying to act very quickly.
Extra alert.
Yeah, extra alert. I'm trying to end the stress
Yeah.
versus when I'm in hypo, it's just like I'm done. Like this is too much. I'm checking out. Like if you want me to be productive, you better check in next week, bro. Because I'm so out of it. But what was good for me to have this book is that prior to reading the book, I had a kind of a confusion because I didn't know if it was my brain because life has definitely been different after a TBI where I did have fatigue, I did have pain, I did have these things, and they seem to be exacerbated by the TBI. But to also realize that I'm having things that are not necessarily TBI symptoms. I'm having things that are brought about because of my inability to cope or to adjust.
So traumatic brain injury is what TBI is.
Yeah. So for me, it's been interesting because on Monday, I started reading the book. On Monday, my law office had a significant challenge come from one of our clients. And it was so significant that like I immediately went into shutdown. I'm like, oh, here we are. I'm like, I just read this book. I now know what's happening to me. And so because I knew what was happening to me, I said, okay, I can't work the rest of the day. Like I could consciously engage in overcoming the process. So I had a bunch of errands. So I just did them slowly. I did not hurry through my errands.
Mm.
I just said, I'm gonna kind of walk through this process. I did some shopping, I did some bills, I did some stuff, but I just said, I'm gonna go slowly.
You accepted reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't try to push through it. I just said, I need to adjust to this. And it was super helpful because I was able to compartmentalize what I was experiencing, right? And as I've been reading a little bit more about this, some of those systemic responses, whether hypo or hyper, relate to your inability to authentically express or identify your emotions and to embrace them. And I
Yeah, you
acknowledge,
weren't fighting your body and saying, do it anyway.
yeah, yeah. So the fact that I will openly acknowledge I'm not a readily available emotional person sometimes. Like I recognize I process things as logically. I'm a problem solver. This has definitely been an impairment when people are like, I don't need you to solve a problem. I need you to just hear me. So I do have to turn that logical process into, okay, the way I solve this problem is I ask them questions that let them talk about themselves.
I relate. I have to engage that consciously too.
Yeah, so I do, but I appreciate that that's not helpful to not have my experience, right? Like if I'm not having my emotions, that's also kind of unique. Not, and it's kind of weird because you don't know what you emotionally need, but being able to at least identify you're having an experience relating to somebody's talking to you, and you start talking about that, that is emotional. So I would start to say, what you're telling me right now, I recognize I'm feeling super stressed. And I realize you can't make it about yourself. Like, I know you're telling me something stressful and I'm feeling stressed, so I need a break. Like, but it helps you be a little bit empathetic because you're recognizing you're having a similar engagement with what's being said to you. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really stressed and it didn't even happen to me.
Yeah, actually, I had an experience earlier this year where I got my hair cut and I was talking to a really young person at a school and I was telling her some things about my situation. And I was really glad to be able to vent. And that's kind of a thing. Sometimes haircutting people will listen to you vent, but she wasn't prepared for some of the stuff I was telling her. And I realized after she got really upset and I didn't know why she was upset, I was like, oh, she's feeling really emotionally overwhelmed by these things that I'm telling her. And so I started to be more careful about who I was sharing things with because you can traumatize people when they hear about trauma, and you have to be careful to protect people from some of that secondhand trauma. Yeah. I mean, I didn't go into a lot of detail, but it was still upsetting to her. She wasn't used to it.
It was enough that she was in trauma. Yeah, well, and I think if you think about, like, if you could come into awareness about your stress, that does, if we come back to your idea of seasons, like seasons don't have to be long, but they are the period in which you're going to recuperate. And so like as soon as I knew, based upon this trauma that was going on with my office, I didn't have the luxury of staying off the grid very long. That's why I had to immediately say, how do I, as quickly as possible, without stress, just embrace that I need to recuperate so I can be productive for my team, because there are people relying upon me not being stressed. Like, they need me to engage in the problem solving process. So what do I need to do? And I appreciate it on Instagram as I've been exploring this. It's not about calming down, right? It's not that you just have to like breathe. You really have to embrace deregulation. Like, you have to embrace, why am I not processing? What is happening that is triggering me? It's not just like you're codependent on getting back in alignment really quick because you're going to hurt people's feelings. You should really care about yourself, and you should say, like, I need to understand what's happening to me. I need to engage with that authentically. I need to be able to express how I'm feeling about it, because these are all, like, in essence, pressure valves that allow the steam and the stuff to go out, so you can go, oh, I'm feeling better now.
The concept of dysregulation was really valuable to me because just identifying somebody's dysregulated and then their logical functions don't work the same way. And there are things that you can do to help people regulate, especially if you're a parent or a spouse. You can, not that it's your responsibility, but sometimes you can stop making the problem worse. And if both of you are dysregulated, it's not a good time to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I've definitely had to say, like, even to somebody yesterday, I'd taken two fairly volatile calls, and I'm basically trying to help these people get into problem solving modes. But by the time I
Yeah.
got through the second one, I was deregulated. I was like, I'm like, so I like, then somebody tried to call me and say, well, how are we going to problem solve that? I said, I realize I can't talk about this right now. I need to, like,
Mhm.
whatever, and and so it was actually this morning that I was able to share my thoughts on it, because I had to get through the rest of everything I had to do yesterday. And I recognized last night I probably could have called, like, I was probably fine after I got through everything I had to do, that I could probably process that. But I still realized, well, it took a while to get to where I was not in a hyper response. Um,
Well, and it's really great that you can pause before bad things happen. Because if you keep on escalating, you lose some of that control. And
yeah,
so if you can just flip your breaker and be like, nope, I'm out before things get bad, that's a really good habit.
yeah. What I think, if what I absolutely know is also, if you try to solve a problem when you're in stress, you'll do a bad, like, because you're reacting, or you're responding, not, in a way that you're not seeing everything. You don't have a clear vision, because you're just trying to put out the fire, where you don't maybe understand why there's a fire, or you don't understand how many different ways that fire will start again, so you're just like, how do I put this thing out? And that's not actually problem solving.
Well,
um
you talked about fight and flight. Like
yeah,
if you're in survival mode, it's not, you're not looking at long term, you're just surviving.
yeah, I agree.
You can cause new problems based on your reaction to whatever happened.
Totally agree. Well, and I realized that I've started to also, like, I have some, like, long-term goals that I'm trying to manifest. They're out there. And
Do they have to be long term?
well, for me, I have some that are long-term. I mean, I
Do
have,
they have to be long term? What makes them long term versus amazing things that could manifest immediately that would be big goals? Like your big money manifestation. Like does it have to be long term?
I guess, I don't know. I mean, the ones that I currently have, I appreciate that they have processes. So, like, like, for example, the weight, like a weight goal. If you lost 40 pounds in a day, that would be bad. I mean, even,
But I guess there are different levels of long term. Like there could be a 1 year long term or there could be a 5 year long term. But if you're talking about manifesting something, some things that, I mean, getting a new job or something, it could be a long term thing, or maybe you just skip a lot of the middle steps if you're focused on the right things and you get in alignment. Maybe it doesn't have to be long term, but you're making it long term by your expectation that it will take a long time to manifest that way.
I agree with that. I agree that, like, if we just say it's just like that thing's supposed to take that long, then that is part of our impairment in the manifestation. I think the way I'm looking at things is, I have it in my mind as something I want to achieve, and I look for the pieces as I go, and when they show up, I act on them.
You're
So
not hurrying the process artificially and saying, I'm impatient that it isn't happening on my timeline that might be faster than it needs to be.
correct. Like, I just kind of have an awareness that that's my goal, and then I look for little avenues that say, take that, like, that's the street, like, take this.
Mhm.
And I realize you have to pay attention to that and see the opportunities. Which I like about The Secret is that oftentimes it's, are you paying attention to the opportunity? Are you aware that it's going to come? Are you looking for that solution? um because for example, in connection with the nonprofit, I talked about um a donor that finally reached out to me. He wants to reach out to the Steward Growth board.
Sweet.
This person has basically an unlimited supply of money, potentially. Like, I mean, in connection with my current resources, his are unlimited.
Wow. Well, how fun to connect with that person.
Yeah, and so he
He
says,
probably could teach us some things about increasing our incomes.
well, he's also working on a legacy fund, right? His fund is 200 years old. So he's in a different spot where it's kind of manifesting just by stewardship, right? He just keeps growing it. Like if we look back at the person who started his fund, that person probably had a lot more effort. Where now the question is, like as I talk to him, he says, I have kind of two paths. If I find something culturally or intrinsically of value, I don't mind spending money on that. He says if I'm developing someone, then we're going to revenue share because the expectation is they're going to share their money. Now, so I've been looking for a way to help the nonprofit, and now like there's that person, but we have to still kind of develop that relationship so that it could manifest, right?
Rock and roll,
Even
Travis.
though, even though there's access to that fund, it still has to be bridged in a way that makes sense, right? So
Sure,
so it's not
sure. I
like,
mean, it's not a done deal. You've got to
yeah.
find
So
value to him in his vision.
yeah, so in essence, I feel I have manifest the resource I need,
Mhm.
but I still have to build a relationship with that resource that can't be just made, right? Like you just like our discussion about seasons, there has to be the right energy, there has to be the right momentum, there has to be the right plans, there has to be the right
Sure.
connections. But the fact that the resource at least now exists, then
You don't have to figure out every step along the way.
right.
That is a really good sign.
Yeah. So and if I'm aware that the energy is not quite ready, then it's okay to not be too eager, right? I can just kind of say, let's just think about this for a second, because I don't want to waste that person's time. Or
But you have to keep your energy right. Like if you were frustrated or upset about the fact that it was taking a long time, that wouldn't be the right energy.
I totally agree.
It's the expectant anticipation, like excitement. It doesn't have to be hurried, but you can just be aware of where your energy is, and if it's not in the right place, then you can change that energy so that it will keep manifesting the way you want it to.
Yeah, well, because even again, it's like the season, right? Like it's okay to just watch, because if you plant seeds too early, they die. If you plant them too late, then they won't fully ripen. And so there's that process of seasons that you're playing. Like for example, you shared a guy with us fairly early, who's owned a airline and he's a venture capitalist. And I came into the conversation super excited and energetic, and I realized that I was not prepared for that resource. Like, even though he was helpful and he gave me suggestions for the question I brought to him, I realized I did not appreciate what a resource he was, because I could have potentially created a different plan and presented it to him again. Now he's still willing to be a resource to us because he's that type of person. But I have not been able to kind of process through what I would present to him again, right?
Yeah.
And so, but in essence, we have two, because he seems like he's a decent guy that would help us. But again, what plan are we taking to him? And
Mhm.
I don't know that, and that's the same spot I'm with this person, is that we don't want to just say, here we are, help us, donate to us, like it's amazing, and we're going to be amazing, and it'll be so amazing, like it's amazing. You have to say like, no, like we have reached some maturity in our process and it's going to work out, and like your investment will be well spent, and we're going to provide
Yes.
this thing.
Yes. We're conscientious. We don't just throw. I mean, we know it's got to be credible. It's got to be researched.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
particularly if you're going for a large goal, you have to be able to I think there may be times where the money just shows up and you're like, oh, what a blessing, and it doesn't matter, and you get to take some time with it. But I think if you're building partnerships in manifestation, you have to create a foundation to that.
Mhm.
So I'm excited that, I mean, and it reminds that we should definitely explore another conversation with your guy. But again, the idea is what are we taking to them, and how are they partnering on it, or what are they what would he be investing in?
But you do need to keep your focus on whatever it is, even if you don't know the next steps. That focus brings the additional people and the information, and you'll start seeing those signals that things are going well. Like you said, those little steps will come and you'll say, oh, that's what I do next. Oh, this thing is still percolating. I don't know. Like, you'll see those signs. But if you get distracted and you focus on some other things, I heard there's this analogy of a trip from the Asking You, and it will be given book, collection. You might know the way to get from Arizona to San Diego. If you keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, you won't necessarily get to your destination because you keep changing what you're doing. You're getting distracted. So you do have to keep your eyes on the prize and not. I mean, if you don't make a clear intention, then you won't make progress that will get you ultimately to the goal. You'll just be stuck in the middle. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think the idea is, well, I guess the idea of stuck is interesting because there's a lot of things that make us stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes being blindly excited is an obstacle. Like sometimes being naively excited is an obstacle, right? So I think that the idea is engaging consciously with awareness about your vulnerability and connection with, where you're at in the process, because even though they're, like manifestation according to the secret could just show up, it could just show up. If it doesn't show up and you're depressed, you're now, you misunderstood the request, right? So like
the frequency of the problem is different from the frequency of the solution. So if you're always focused on the problem, you don't find that solution.
Yes. So when last, like April or May, I tried to manifest $1 billion. I know that inside my head, I'm thinking, according to the rules, it could just show up.
If you believe it.
Yeah, well, whatever. Like, according to the general rules, like if the rule is absolutely perfect according to the secret,
right,
it should be able to just show up.
Yep.
Like if I'm optimistic,
if you allow it, if you believe it, if your frequency is right,
if I make room for it to show up, it should just show up.
And you know whether it's right, because if it was right, it would show up.
Right. And I agree with that. So, but then there's the question of, do you know how to accept into your life $1 billion? Because that's part of the preparation for it to be right. Because if it just showed up and you blew it, like that'd be horrible.
People do actually blow money all the time and then start over. Like people do bankruptcy and they have really bad lose their fortune scenarios. And the rules also would be like, it's not hard for the universe to give you another giant fortune. Like it's as easy for you to get a castle as a button.
Yes. So I appreciate that because I don't know myself how to accept $1 billion into my life. It didn't show up because of whatever is happening inside my process in relation to that manifestation.
Now you know that person. He probably knows people who know how to deal in billions of dollars. Is that true? Like if you said, hey, I have $1 billion, what can I do with, where can I park this? He could probably tell you.
Yes, but I also recognize that I'm still myself. I know that when I created the idea of Steward Growth, I wanted to have access to $1 billion because I could do good with $1 billion. I never said I wanted $1 billion. I did not want it for myself because I want it to be accessible to people for development so that I'm blessing more people's lives and I'm developing people and so I do not want $1 billion for my personal self. I just need access to $1 billion.
Like that about you, Travis.
So what I realize is that I have access to $1 billion now. So the question is, how do I facilitate the connection to that resource? So because it was never about me in my having it in my personal life, because I have what I need. I'm able to do what I want. I'm able to enjoy my life. I make enough money to enjoy my life. I know
Abraham
that
Hicks would say that it's in your vibrational escrow, which means if you have the desire for it, it automatically is available to you. And all you have to do is allow it. Like it's there waiting for you.
yeah. So now the question is, how do we, well, I guess as we're thinking about that process, when I think when we think about goals that are really hard, and what was interesting in my neuropsych, one of the things that came out, which is kind of hard to research, and I haven't been able to research it, it says my character profile undefined. Like it didn't say Myers-Briggs or something like that. It didn't say what I could go research to find out more about this character profile.
From your neuropsych?
Yeah, it says my character profile based upon the elements that came out.
Yeah.
I like to pursue unreasonably challenging endeavors.
Yeah. Challenge is one of my top 4 values. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make one other observation that I think might help people. And the Abraham Hicks people would also say that if you can desire it, like if you desire something, the universe can give it to you. Like it's possible for you to get it.
Yeah. So realizing that I think there was other information in relation to that character profile that I thought was interesting. But it is interesting to realize that I just have a propensity to try to pursue unreasonably challenging endeavors. Like it wasn't hard endeavors. It says unreasonably challenging endeavors. I thought, I wonder if that's like is that
impossible? That's
yeah,
like
yeah.
But that's how amazing things get built is people have these wildly crazy ideas and they go for it anyway.
Right. Well, because I could look at my life and I'm like, well, I actually achieved a lot of my things.
Well, you've done all the easy stuff. Now all you have left is the ridiculously hard stuff.
Well, even in my life, I feel stuff that I've done it's what gets me up in the morning. Like I like to feel like I'm pursuing something that isn't like, great, I'll go milk a cow.
You shoot for the moon. Yeah.
So let's do this. So anyway, I thought it was interesting, but I also felt like I appreciated the warning in it because sometimes that the unnecessarily challenging endeavor also reflects you're potentially burning yourself out on purpose or out
the
of
perfectionistic stuff also hits you where you're like, why am I not accomplishing this impossible thing?
Yeah, where you have to say like, can I embrace an unreasonably challenging thing with perspective so that it's not a burden, it's a challenge, it's exciting, but maybe I'm not burning all my resources on it unduly or something of that nature.
And maybe I'm not like not measuring up because I can't do this thing that nobody can do.
Right.
So I think one thing that has come to mind as you guys have been talking, I was in the middle of carpool pickup, and so that's why my camera was off, but I was still listening. But 2 things that came to mind are mindset and emotional intelligence. And I think it's great that as we continue to manifest, we learn more about ourselves, right? Like for a minute, it might seem impossible, but then as we accomplish even something as small as, manifesting a button, then we're like, oh, okay, maybe that confidence then builds that we're like, okay, maybe I really can shoot for the castle. And Travis, you had used the words react versus respond. And those are 2 very different things. Like a reaction, if you take baking soda and vinegar, you're going to have a chemical reaction. But if you're responding, then you're in that emotional place where you're like, okay, I can actually respond and be in a place where I can have more control of what's happening versus just feeling like the ping pong ball going wherever it is dictated, right? And then that mindset, is it a challenge or is it an opportunity? And I feel like as we go and as you're recognizing, hey, like Travis, you had talked about the hard thing at work, right? Like, okay, that was a stormy season during that work day. But as you're able to recognize that and then be able to use that emotional intelligence and that mindset, then it helps you reel it all back to, okay, so what am I working on? What am I working towards manifesting? And so I just think it's really neat that as you manifest, you're not ever the same person. You can't ever go back to what you
Right.
were. So
Mhm.
as you grow and you become something new, then it does set a new challenge or a new opportunity or a new thing to manifest. Like your vision broadens. And so, and Travis, I think it's really neat that you talk about, you wanted access to $1 billion. Everybody has access to it, but like you're saying, okay, how do we manifest to where you're actually seeing those revenues or those avenues of, this is one place I can have access here and I can have access here. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. I think it's really neat as we're talking, that as you manifest, you do become something new, and then your season changes. Because everything, I was thinking too, like they talk about, oh, your seasons of life. Um, and sometimes those seasons, change quicker than you thought, or, when you're in the season of raising your toddlers and they're like, oh, enjoy all of it because you're going to miss this season at one point. And I mean, there's so many different things that you could characterize as a season. And so it's neat to just, as you can think about that mindset and that emotional intelligence, to have that perspective of, okay, this is an opportunity to learn and to grow, to then become something new, to then start manifesting even more of what you're wanting.
Absolutely.
I think one of the most powerful parts of steward growth is the collaboration. And so maybe one of us wouldn't be able to manifest alone, but the more people we get who are focused on similar goals, we can really manifest some powerful things as we support each other.
I agree. I think what's exciting about what Michelle's saying, and you just said, America, is the idea that as you become a new person inside your growth, you get to start at a different place, right? Because you have a different awareness. And sometimes like I'll look back and say, wow, I've been here before, but it's different because maybe I'm more tired, or I have to, because like in 2008, for example, I lost 40 pounds. Like, so it's like, again, a cycle, but I did it a lot faster based upon other elements that were going on in my life. But there was also things that I didn't do about that were not effective. Right. So being in a different process where you're relearning the same thing, but more effectively, also is really valuable, right? That the cycles and the seasons, if they're not improving, that's a little bit your fault because you're not investing in the learning process. You're not saying, "Oh, I got this," or it's also a manifestation that you are not paying attention, or you're being careless, or you're being kind of casual, or you're because you know that at some point, if you excelled at a greater level, you had a different focus at that point, right? You were working on a different energy or a different rawness sometimes. And then as you come down off the mountain and you're like, okay, I'm going to climb that mountain again, and you realize it's harder the second time, it's often because you're achieving a different goal, right? Because you're also
It's Groundhog Day.
yeah, where you could be learning or you could be going backwards. And even even Murray, he had to go backwards for a while before he realized, oh, I get the rules now, and now I can play. And then you can go faster because once you actually master the rules, then you're like, oh, I can actually do this, way differently than I was doing it.
How do people learn the rules?
Well, I think you have to pay attention to them, right? I mean, like the rules are. I don't think the rules are hard to actually identify. It's most often as I go through my process, I have to ask myself, what's the rule? Like, what is the thing that is kind of like universal here or unbreakable here, or what am I expecting to be different that is not different? Like it's happening fairly consistently, and why am I fighting that rule? Because I'm just thinking life's going to not respond as it's responding.
So that's another thing back to that loving what is. Like you can fight the rules and it won't turn out well, or you can learn the rules and make some better progress.
Yeah, which is totally fine, right? Like if like sometimes people they'll be actually surprised when I talk to them in negotiations of settlement or whatever, and I'm explaining their processes or options. I'll add in my possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
and they, even if they might negatively impact me, and I'm just saying, well, this is the stuff that could happen, and you can recognize that, like, there's this moment where they're expecting a negative response from me, like, and you're going to screw me, or you're going to, like, you're an ungrateful person, or like, how would you, but if you just say, like, these are things that could happen, these are processes you could do, this is how I would have to adjust, this is how you'd have to adjust, these are, like, if we're just talking about the tree of, the decision tree, yes, no,
Mm-hmm.
yes, no, and these are responses, possible things that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
It actually helps eliminate anxiety, because you're now no longer worried about the future, and you're not denying things that are natural processes either. You're not saying do something that you wouldn't normally do. I mean, you can ask people to try to do things they wouldn't normally do just to be courageous or whatever. But if you recognize their natural tendencies are certain paths, you shouldn't deny those. Like, if you know that somebody has to do something really difficult, it's easier to get them to do that difficult thing if you can make it as normal or consistent with them as possible.
Yeah.
So I think it's good. But I really enjoyed this idea on seasons, because it's just that chance where you can not focus on the normal stuff, because even as I've been thinking about, like, my seasons in the fall, I recognize that the fall is my celebration season, because I realize that I'm coming to the end. Like, sometimes it's been scary, because as a new entrepreneurial dad, I was like, oh no, like, Christmas is coming, this is going to be horrific. But as I got through that process, and, like, my business has started to do better, and I had funds for Christmas, and I was like, oh, how exciting that I can just enjoy Christmas and I can bless people's lives. And it's like the pressure of summer is off, like the heat of summer is off, the tension of summer is off, because even though, I mean, like, summer is supposed to be like your long stride where you're, like, getting a lot of stuff done, and you're like, sometimes summers can be somewhat oppressive, because there is a lot of heat in summer that is, like, fatiguing and wearing. And
Mm.
but in the winter, that sometimes is the depressive side, because people are so cold and they're so, like, in the drudge of life, that it's not very creative.
Dark. It's
Yeah, dark, and people are just
cut
like,
off from people because you're at home.
yeah, and so you recognize the energy of everything just kind of comes down in winter, because people are, like, they're just trying to get through it.
Go down.
And then you get into spring, and also it's like super ideas and exciting, and this is like where you're going to create the new thing that's going to get you through the summer. And so, like, I recognize that I have that process in a year where I know that I'm going to get a lot of interesting stuff, around Valentine's Day, because I'm coming into the thaw, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start running and exciting, and
It's really a thing. If Debbie were here, she'd be talking about the seasons of professional organizing, and it can really affect your business and what your customers are doing, whether it's starting school or ending school or the new year. These cycles and seasons can affect a lot of things.
yeah. And like, I recognize, I don't necessarily have whatever that winter sickness is where people get super depressed.
Seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily have that, but I just hate winter. So I'll budget in a trip to St. George or to the desert in
Oh,
January, just so I consciously disrupt winter, right? Like, I consciously um I do something that says I don't have to be in winter. I get to do something else.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
You
So
can look forward to your trip to the sun.
yeah. So, and I think that if we recognize where we're going to be vulnerable, and we insert, like, the vacation, then it does help you. Like, you have to sometimes put in your season, right? Like, I need a season about here, because I need to force myself out of this system.
The funk. But do you need to force yourself out, or can you just accept that feeling of low?
I don't want it. Like,
Yes.
I recognize that I need vacations and trips, because it's not like I'm
I
necessarily
love vacations and trips.
yeah, I'm not necessarily taking a vacation and trip often from the season itself. I recognize this with my work system.
You're
I
not avoiding your life.
Yeah,
You're giving yourself what you need. You're feeding your soul.
Correct. Yeah, I'm incrementally saying I'm choosing to go do this thing because I recognize it's valuable to me and I'm a better person after I get through it. And it's enriching. It's a different enriching. Like when I take my trips and I go out on my own and go do stuff, I recognize that that's a different learning process for me. That's about my wander. Like I know that there's many people who don't want to wander with me, but I love it because I like that solitude. I need it, and I'm a different person after taking pictures and trying new foods and seeing new things, and it's just like I come back with this wealth of information that is now like kind of stored in my soul about I experienced something new. Like I left my normal system and said I can go see something else.
That
So
novelty.
I love creating systems too. My seasons, I guess, creating seasons.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to that emotional intelligence too. That's more about Travis's self-care because he's not avoiding, but he's making sure that he's paying attention to that to
It's
then be able to
proactive
thrive.
instead of escaping.
Yeah, being able to thrive.
Yeah, I love it. All right, well, we're at the about an hour, and I love strategic manifestation. I hope that those who maybe are watching on YouTube or other places, that you really get excited about being able to create, vision or space for the thing that you really want to show up. I think America did a great job with bringing in seasons because that's very much about the self-care process of, how you have to build in chances to re-nourish the stuff that's valuable or needs to be a resource as you're manifesting. And appreciate Michelle's wellness foundation discussions, even though she's in carpool. We always appreciate other people adding. And this is a workshop. It's not a presentation or a lecture. So anybody's welcome to join. We do this once a month and it's very exciting. We also have other classes where we explore other topics such as When Life Gives You Lemons, Small Business Toolbox,
Readers Book Club.
Readers Book Club. There's for lawyers and literature or for people who just like law and literature. There's the Scrivener's Quill. We have another one. What's that? Oh, we have Fill Your Lamps, which is a little bit diverse because we're not talking just about mental wellness. We're talking about maybe physical or financial or emergency preparedness, just places you might have a vacancy.
Conflict coaching.
Oh, yes, and conflict coaching, where we specifically talk about the resources related to how do we get through conflict. All right. Anything else anybody wants to add before we sign off?
Enjoy the season.
All right. Sounds good. Happy Halloween. Let's see where this button at.